Bergson and the Holographic Theory. The Death of Intelligent Design, or a Trial in a Vacuum for Philosophical Zombies. Intelligent design. I discovered that this collapsed circa 2008 with a Dover, Pennsylvania court case, as chronicled by one of the key participants, Kevin Miller, a molecular biologist, professor at Brown U. Now, YouTube recommended this to me. You notice it was made in 2006, 16 years ago, but tons of views, at least 467,000 as we speak, probably more. I noticed it went up 21,000 in 1 week. So it seems to still have lots of relevance and still be considered quite valid. So I got curious, and this is what I saw. This whole debate took place within a remarkable, near-perfect philosophical vacuum. So Kevin describes a set of events. 2003, a debate before the Ohio Board of Education. Question, should ID be included in the curriculum of public schools? And another case in Georgia, I think 2003, a trial over a Board of Education slapping a sticker on Kevin's biology textbook with a warning: evolution is a theory, not a fact. It's either in the yellow DeKalb County disclaimer. This textbook contains material on evolution. Evolution is a theory, not a fact, regarding the origin of living things. Kevin notes, theories explain facts, unite them. You study atomic theory, not atomic facts. The theory unites the myriad of atomic facts, which is a valid point. In fact, everything in science, he says, should be considered with an open mind. So it's not a question of theories. All of science is theories. So it would be hard to dispute this. Continuing these events, 2004 in Dover, Pennsylvania. I believe it's 2004. Education board, wanted to teach intelligent design. The teachers refused, saying that they can't teach falsehood. This led to a lawsuit and a trial in 2005, with Kevin Miller being one of the lead witnesses, or the lead witness. Eventually, he notes the board, in fact, quickly, was voted out of office, all 8 members, even though it was a conservative area. ID, intelligent design, was ruled not a scientific idea by a federal judge. It does not belong in the classroom. So yes, intelligent design is not a scientific theory, surely not in the sense that evolutionary biology is working on it, or has textbooks on it, or there is a body of theory on how it could work, etc. It is certainly a critique, but it's also a bit more, as we'll see. Continuing the events, Kansas, where the board wanted to change the definition of science itself from seeking natural explanations, science seeking natural explanations, to including non-natural explanations. For Miller, this could include astrology, Wicca, phrenology, pyramid power, New Age mysticism, but none of this is testable. It is not science. For Kevin, to quote, you open up the classroom to ID, you open it up to a whole bunch of pseudoscientific beliefs. Is this really what you want to do? So Miller goes through a series of issues that came up in the Dover case that to him were key points in ID's collapse. One was, number one, gaps in the fossil record, lack of transitional forms, a key critique of ID. For example, one would need intermediates between land mammals and whales and dolphins, which appear to evolve from land mammals, but there seems to be no intermediates. But Kevin claims, nope, tons of intermediates are now found. He points to a recent discovery of a walking whale, and that 5 such intermediates are now found. Now he says science is enormously self-critical. So they began looking at this. You would have to have redesigned the middle ear. For hearing in air is quite different from hearing in water. So you'd have to have a transition from the structure of an ear devoted to or tuned to air, working in air, to working in water. No problem. These transitions were also found. The second thing, which I'm not going to go into, he says data from whole genome sequencing. This was not refuted by intelligent design. I'm just not going to bother with this particular one. Third, Behe and irreducible complexity, the notion thereof, completely refuted. This is from Behe's Black Box book, 1996. And in that book, to note, Behe used a mousetrap as a simple analogy for a device with components where all those components needed to be there, irreducible set of components, otherwise it did not function. So this subject, to Kevin, was an icon of ID, a bulwark of the ID argument. And he notes, quoting Behe, an irreducibly complex system cannot be reduced directly by numerous successive slight modifications of a precursor system, because any precursor to an irreducibly complex system, such as the mousetrap, has to have all its parts or it doesn't work, that is missing a part is by definition non-functional. That is, it cannot be selected by evolution because it's a device or a being, an organism that does not work. And he uses as, he being Kevin, as a poster child for intelligent design, the bacterial flagellum, which is a little outboard motor, so to speak, or inboard of a bacteria for moving around. And like a mousetrap, it's got an irreducible set of parts. So this is clearly bothersome, this entire argument, a must to defeat in Kevin's mind. Perhaps, shall we say, too much of a must, because I think it becomes sort of a psychological need to defeat this argument, when in fact it should have been looked at a little more closely. So Miller's characterization of Behe. This is to him Behe's concept. That is, a functional machine there on the left of the picture is created by individual parts that themselves have no function. Therefore, natural design or natural selection cannot shape the components. No components with no function. For Kevin, the biological reality is all these components exist with already natural functions. So you're just putting together components that are already functional into a new device, shall we say, that's got a different conglomerate or overall or global function composed of all these functions that already exist. And so he sums it up this way. And design, intelligent design, parts useless on their own, evolution, parts that do other job. So Miller argues thus. In intelligent design, given all these subcomponents have no function, therefore if we take away 40 of the flagellum's parts, leaving just 10, what's left should be non-functional, right, he says? But it's not. In fact, those 10 parts are fully functional. In fact, what you end up with, he knows, is the type 3 secretory system, comprised of 10 parts. So this statement of Behe's, he says, is wrong. Any precursor to a irreducibly complex system that is missing a part is by definition non-functional, because as Kevin shows up there, I've taken away 40 of the 50 parts and we still have something that's functional. And he says that is the heart and soul of the intelligent design argument. And then he says it's even wronger than that. And the audience laughs. He says, because almost every protein in the flagellum is strongly homologous to other proteins that have functions elsewhere in the cell. And so that picture, which is a little vague there, but it's showing that all these component parts seem to have parts that exist elsewhere in other places in the cell. Now, I'm sure that to the philosophically asleep, filling the Case Western Lecture Hall, and to the 465 or 67 or whatever it is now subsequent viewers, and heck, I'll throw in the entirety of the consciousness studies readership and authors, this argument impacts as a biological tour de force, devastating, final, 15 arrows in the body of intelligent design. And it's so seductive to see one's intellectual, and in this case usually also political enemies, so easily, so definitively destroyed. And a wonder, a suspicion in the back of my mind was now confirmed. There's lots of Kevin Millers. This is the Kevin Miller who I used as an exemplar in this article. Namely, with little comprehension of Bayes' deep implications, biologists have bumbled, and I say bumbled cluelessly, into AI's problem of common sense knowledge, thus into the problem of consciousness, cognition, the relation of consciousness to cognition, and non-computational thought. Penrose's discussion, with zero comprehension thereof, of what they've bumbled into. Elsewhere, Miller had made his argument. That is, there's a pool of already functional bioparts available to evolution in more mundane form in the context of Bayes' mundane, easy to understand Mousetrap. He said, well, the hold down bar, that can serve as a toothpick. It's got another function. The platform is kindling. 3 of the components can work together as a tie clip. Let's put together the platform, the spring, and the hammer, and so on. Notice just right off the bat, the platform now has 2 different possible functions. Who's going to decide which function to use? What if there's more? Kevin then is claiming to have an algorithm that can design a mousetrap without consciousness from a set of possible, already functional components. Just like this. The set of possible components on the right, the box, the pencil, etc., forming, shall we say, a crossbow-like mousetrap or a beheading-like mousetrap. As I noted, the design I saw from an engineering test. In other words, it's a problem of common sense knowledge, using fundamental pieces of the world, the concrete world that we live in, and creating devices. It's a deep problem in AI and unresolved. Core problems with it in this functions themselves, as I noted in other places. Here was a 1971 article by Freeman and Newell, a model for functional reasoning and design. And this was a program that designs devices via matching functions of objects. For example, we can design a knife because we have a blade and a handle. And the blade has certain functions. P2 and P1 there provides for holding a narrow object, provides being held by a human hand. Well, that's the handle. And there's functional requirements. The blade needs to be held. The hand needs to be held, etc. So a knife is created by matching functions of a blade, of a handle, with the functional requirements. The problem, the list of possible functions of a pencil, for example, is indefinite. No database will have an exhaustive list. Why? Because functions, or similarly, same difference, or features of an object like rigidity, length, etc., are creatures of transformations. And the set of possible transformations is infinite. In fact, an analogy itself is a transformation. We have those analogies that we saw down there. We create a mousetrap that's analogous to a crossbow or analogous to a beheader. A crossbow analogy here is being applied to the set of components. That is, that analogy, that dynamic transformation, placing those components under that event, that dynamic event of crossbow shooting, is causing features or functions to emerge. New functions of the pencil, new functions of the box corner, that would be where the pencil will be lodged to hold up the axe, etc. Which brings up transformations. We just saw this is the key problem. The real problem, Big Ed noted, is the transformations from device A, say, to device B. That is the simultaneously coordinated set of transformations needed to create a new functioning device, the irreducible transformation set. And we saw examples. McDonald had made a series of simple traps to increasingly more complex traps. Here's in the first series that he constructed with 6 traps. We have this simple trap, and we're going to transform it to a more complex trap. Place the paw right there. But look at all the transformations necessary. Bend the arm. There's one bend through 90 degrees, so that the end is perpendicular to the axis of the spring and points toward the platform. A specific bend. Bend the other arm in a different way, in a different position. 180 degrees opposite. Shorten one arm so its length is less than the distance from the top of the platform to the floor. Introduce the platform with staples, and we could go on and on. In fact, and if this were broken down into even tinier steps, it would be more horrendous. Remember, a non-functional intermediate step between these two traps cannot be selected via natural selection for survivability because it doesn't function. Second series, say the transition from trap 5 to trap 6. Same problem. The hold down bar appears now suddenly out of nowhere with an anchoring, a type of anchoring on the platform. There's a fancy precise release mechanism. There's repositioning on the platform. The hammer is forced down, reposition. With each step, we decrease the probability of random occurrence exponentially. If you have, just for the simple numbers, if 1 change is a 1 in 10 chance, 2 changes have 1 in 100, 3 changes have 1 in 10 to the third, or 1 in 1,000, etc. And in biological world, we're talking on the order of millions, 1 in a million, etc., etc. In other words, as we increase the number of simultaneous steps we need, transformations we need to go from trap 5 to trap 6, we're raising the improbability exponentially of this happening by chance. And remember, this could be the transition between 2 types of beetles. And yes, or different inner ear structures. Remember that for Kevin. And transformations take us to Penrose and his non-computational thought, which he identified as requiring consciousness. Remember this, we've talked about it several times. His visual proof of a computation that does not halt, a halting problem, adding successive hexagonal numbers to always equal a cubical number, where you're folding each hexagonal number in a 3-sided cube and stacking each successive stacking always making a cubical number. Why non-computational? Why does it require consciousness? Because these are transformations. What we're looking at there in Penrose's proof is a transformation over an indivisible flow of time. If it's not indivisible, if it's a series of discrete steps, one step falling away into non-existence, the next one arrives, you cannot perceive the globality of the transformation. and therefore the invariance that has registered across that transformation. The invariance there in that particular stacking thing is this: every stack makes a cube. Or, as we noted many times, a simple event like coffee stirring has a ton of invariance over its dynamic form as the spoon rotates, as a radial flow field, the inertial tensor, adiabatic ratio, acoustical invariance. Using a pencil as an analogy for a stir for coffee, there's insertion then into the indivisibly transforming invariance structure, and the invariants still hold. Now, the zero time, that is the time, quote unquote, of discrete instants, each instant having the duration of a mathematical point, each instant disappearing as the next arrive. These instantaneous abstract states / instance of the computer cannot support this, and cannot support the globality of the transformation required to perceive invariance. AI, due to its model, that is, its metaphysic of time, that is, this discrete time, is in principle excluded from common sense knowledge, and thus actual true cognition. AI, in principle, cannot support design. Neither can Darwinian evolution. Evolution's, quote, algorithm, unquote, for design simply employs random mutations together with natural selection. Holding to this artificial design scheme, artificial design without consciousness, no consciousness involved, its expositors employ very vague language as to how it works. I've noted this before. Dennett simply says, well, evolution just generates and tests things, with no explication of how evolution simply generates new devices, such as, well, Mousetrap number 5 to test them out. Or Eugenie Scott, we just do borrowing and swapping. Kevin Miller himself uses mix and matching. So he expected that the opportunism of evolutionary processes would mix and match proteins. How? Schirmer just uses the term co-op as evolution co-ops features to use for another purpose. Dawkins, well, yeah, evolution was simply, quote, commandeered, unquote, this component for the bacterium flagellum. So, complete vagary into what's really going on. Implicit invoking of the unconscious algorithm of AI. And so, looking back, we should note, on Behe's concept, this was clearly an absurd characterization of Behe. It has nothing to do with functionless parts. It's how you design a fully functional device from a set of parts with entirely different functions, or transform device A to functioning device B with one coherent transformation set. So, intelligent design is not a scientific theory. Granted, but what is AI? Computer science and cognitive simulation, cognitive systems, cognitive science. In the framework of common sense knowledge, these are an effort to demonstrate that computers can solve natural problems like building mousetraps without consciousness. The beginning acknowledged this book, Human Problem Solving, with Newell and Simon. 1972, it started before that in the early 60s. The context in which AI started was actually cognitive simulation, simulating human problem solution paths. Newell and Simon, and I couldn't find nice examples of this, were actually comparing protocols, the steps that their human problem solver, GPS, took to solve a certain problem versus the same steps humans reported verbally in solving the problem and trying to show that they were parallel, implicitly or explicitly the same. But there were so many difficulties with this. It was so, I'm not going to call it sloppy. It was just so imprecise and so doubtful that this particular path was given up on. And AI diverged to saying, heck with replicating humans. We'll just brute force intelligence without worrying about human simulation. So we're not dealing in these disciplines, AI, cognitive science, with biological design devices, beetles, bees, but with human design of devices. In fact, here's a schema of Newell and Simon's general problem solver. Note it says that it uses a procedure called means-ends analysis, where you determine the difference between the goal and the current state by applying operators that might reduce the difference. All the operators, by the way, are predefined, and actually one can show that finding the operators is part of the problem in the first place. But there, notice we're transforming object A into object B, which would be equivalent to transforming trap 5 to trap 6. So in essence, so far, this whole effort has been an ongoing disproof. By the way, that transformation, but here, you already know what trap 6 looks like. You're not creating a new trap 6. You're simply trying to show a path, an algorithmic path, given you've defined all the dimensions to move from trap 5 to trap 6. That is, you're giving away the problem. And that was the kind of the recognized problem. But Kevin implies biology has solved the problem. Biologists know how something called evolution designs without consciousness. They're just not teaching folks in AI or cognitive science. So, in one realm of science, computer science, acknowledged failure. Fairly generally acknowledged. There's people that deny it. But thus far, we've seen this, like Jan LeCun in the neural network framework, admitting that they've got a long way to go working on common sense knowledge. They're not there yet. So far, they have no proof that they can do this. But in another realm, biology, there's basically no awareness of what they're actually trying to do. Now, throughout the talk, the Christian community is the object of a subtle derision. Kevin tries to avoid this, but it still comes through. Their efforts to correct a felt problem, well pitied. They, however, have an intuition, and it is not wrong. But they have self-brought on their problems. These arguments have been ignored. But this is just a symptom. I'm not complaining. Well, I am, but this has been ignored. That's my real complaint. Why? Well, I think because Bergson on even superficial analysis is mystical. By mystical, I mean, in Bergson's framework, individual mind or consciousness is integrally part of, an aspect of, an expression of universal mind, universal consciousness. Christians cannot deal with this. They have an abhorrence of the mystical. And neither could the church. Bergson's works were placed on the index of forbidden books. In the Christian world, even consciousness itself is not considered. The great critic of evolution, Stephen Meyer, throughout all his works, one cannot find the word, as far as I can see, consciousness. It is simply not a subject. This leaves them defenseless, ineffective against A, the AI model of mind and man. They have no alternative model, only appeals to Scripture. And unfortunately for them, the only coherent alternative to the computer model of mind, as I've been arguing, is Bergson's, and it's mystical. And this could be a problem, says the rat. And the defenses against evolution, with this implicit form of AI. Bergson had already refuted Kevin in 1907. Frankly, the thought in this work is so far beyond the mind state of a Kevin Miller, not his intelligence, just his programming, one can only shake one's head. But let me emphasize simultaneously, and I don't want to create the wrong impression here, Bergson is not simple intelligent design. For that, what's really going on when we look much deeper. But this is just ignorance on the biologist's part. But the sin of philosophy, I consider it the sin, the complete ignoring of Bergson, failure to understand it. Now, Bergson avoided the word God, opting instead for the vital or creative force, that is, the intensive force of consciousness expressing as the extended field of matter, with matter's mathematical treatment being an ideal limit never truly reached, but practical for predictive purposes. It's a framework that embraces science, less math, but places it in the larger framework of questions of which biology seems abysmally unaware. So, perhaps a better objective for the Christian community might have been start children on real philosophy. Start at K1. So next we'll see. Till then, signing off.